Welcome to this month's Family Business Webinar presented by the First Bank Center for Family-Owned Businesses. My name is Ed Hart, and I am the Senior Vice President and Director of the Center for Family-Owned Businesses. Along with Joe Ambrose, our Executive Director, and the entire First Bank team, we thank you for taking the time to be with us today. Today's session will inspire you, educate you, and hopefully generate some ideas for you as you look at the legacy and impact of your family business. Before we begin, we invite you to take a moment to watch this message from the Chairman and President of First Bank, Mr. Michael Dearberg.
Family business is so much more than just business as usual. It takes an entirely different mindset, a different vision. You know a bright future is found in strong traditions. You see the freedom in looking further down the road. As part of the fourth generation of my family to help lead First Bank, I know we share your vision. That's why we've created the First Bank Center for Family-Owned Businesses to share our experience with monthly webinars, tailored products, tools, and education specific to family-owned businesses. Your vision is our vision. Let our experience be yours. Let's see what your future can be.
As Michael mentioned, we are a fourth generation, privately held family-owned business, so today's speaker and topic resonates with us deeply. It's our pleasure and honor to have one of the premier experts in family business and truly a pioneer in family business education with us today. For over 40 years, Dennis Jaffe has been one of the leading architects in the field of family enterprise consulting. As both an organizational consultant and clinical psychologist, he helps multi-generational families to develop governance practices that build the capability of next-generation leadership and ensure ongoing capability of financial organizations and family offices to serve their family clients. An acclaimed speaker, workshop leader, and writer, Dennis is one of the most recognized names in the field of family business, having helped hundreds of families and their advisors work through generational transition issues. He has written more than 100 articles, and his books have influenced the development of the field of family business. His most recent book, Borrowed from Your Grandchildren, The Evolution of 100-Year Family Enterprises, reports on his interviews with family members from 100 global 100-year business families. It is truly an honor to welcome Dennis Jaffe to the First Bank webinar series. Dennis, along with Josh Barron, Pierre DuPont, among others, will be featured presenters at the First Bank Center for Family-Owned Businesses Symposium in Santa Barbara, California in October. For more information on the symposium and in other services that we provide at the First Bank Center for Family-Owned Business, you can reach us at www.firstbank/family business. Now, without further ado, it is my great honor and pleasure to introduce to you all my friend and colleague, Mr. Dennis Jaffe. Dennis?
Hello, Ed. And
Great to see you today, my friend.
I am delighted to be here. And what I want to do in the next half hour or so is take you on a quick journey. That's a wonderful journey that I took, um, thankfully, and before COVID happened. I made a very good career move in my life, which is that I retired. And
Nice.
that left me with a lot of open space. And I started to ask myself, I've worked with family businesses actually all over the world for, let's just say, a lot of years. And people are always asking, well, what are the best family businesses? What can we learn from them? And so I loved books like Built to Last and Search for Excellence, where we're not looking at the average family business. I mean, it's nice to know what a lot of family businesses are doing, but people are really asking, who are the models for the future? Who are the really successful families, and what can we learn from them? And so I decided to meet and search out the best, most successful family businesses. So how do I find them? How do I retire? How do I define it? I came up with a very simple definition. First of all, I figured the best family businesses are ones that have lasted for generations. So I looked at large family businesses that had been successful for more than had control in the third generation or beyond. So they were approaching, or some of them were way over 100-year-old businesses. And they had been successful in creating wealth, not just as a business, but they also had a shared identity as a family. They were from all over the world. I visited 20 countries. I interviewed 2 people from different generations from each of these families. And I was, to my surprise, so can we do share screen? There we go. So to my surprise, I came upon a number of things that that these families had in common. So I interviewed 100 families, 20 countries, and these were families that created wealth across generations. And so some people may be saying, well, I'm a first generation family. What can I learn from 100-year families? Well, I asked them to go back. And one of the things that the questions I asked is, what did you do in the first and second generation that set you up for success? So by looking back, we have some lessons. And what I was very, very surprised was that there was an incredible set of themes that emerged. Not some of them that I had never thought about, some of them that you may recognize, but these are the things that these families had done to be successful over generations. So that's what I'm going to talk about in the next. First of all, one of the things that I learned is that which a lot of us know, is that family businesses are fundamentally different from public companies in 2 ways, and these ways really have to do with their success. The first is that as owners, they have a personal relationship with each other. So they're not just investors that are together for financial return. They have relationship. They know each other. They care about each other, and they have a broader agenda. That sure, they want to make money, but there are other things and other concerns. So they're building on a personal relationship as owners. And the second thing about these families is that they want to pass on their wealth and their business to cross generations. And so they have a long-term focus. They're not focused on this quarter's returns. They're focused on generations ahead. And of course, this affects the decisions they make. This affects what they do. And so the other thing I found is that they're more. These are more than just businesses. They're not a single family household by the third, fourth generation. They're a community of households that are connected both by heritage and by personal bonds, but also by as a business. So they have features of both family and business, and you can't just look at them as a business. Can't just look at them as a family. They're something else. And they have a mission and a purpose beyond financial return. And the most clearly, they're evolving. That they're reinventing themselves. Half of the families had sold by the second or third generation had sold their legacy business and were working together as investors, or they bought new businesses. Some of them, those that didn't sell their business, they sometimes had several businesses. They had diversified into a number of areas. So they were very, very complex entities, and they had many paths and leaders. And let me talk about some of the insights that came up from these 100 families. First insight is that these families made 2 what they called very, very critical decisions and choices. And the first one was made by the first generation, maybe not intentionally, but they built a great business. They built a successful business beyond what they had expected, beyond their dreams, and they created a wonderful thing that they could turn over to the next generation. But these families reported a second decision that they made, maybe in the second, sometimes in the third generation, which is to invest the wealth that they had in creating a great family. In other words, they didn't just remain a bunch of people related investing. They really invested in the growth and development of themselves as a family beyond a business. And so they were both families and extended families and businesses. And since they were not one when we say family, a lot of us think, oh, how we think about our wives and our husbands and our kids and the household, but these were extended families. They thought of themselves as almost like tribes. They had legacy values. They had a shared identity, a history. They celebrated things together. They but unlike tribes, they didn't all live together. They were dispersing, and so they had to create things to bring themselves together, to create connection. And a lot of the investment that they made to maintain themselves as a family had to do with bringing themselves together and doing things together, to remain together as a family as well as a business. Concerns of this extended family tribes were interesting. They said, well, what we're concerned about is, what is our wealth about? What's the future facing our children? How do we raise productive children? How do we keep the wealth um, uh, um, uh, from having a negative effect on the family? How do we create a positive impact on the community? How can we express the gratefulness that we have for our wealth? Now, look at all these. None of these concerns are about business. They know they have a successful business. They know they have to maintain it. But the questions that come up in the second, third generation have to do with family, not just business. These families are talking more and more over the generations about what they call non-financial wealth. Um, they talk about four types of wealth that has nothing to do with finance. First of all, they're known as a family, and they're known. What are they known for? They have a tradition. They have values. They have a role in the community, and this is what form what they call their legacy capital, their purpose. Then they have relationship capital, that because they know each other and because they trust each other and care about each other, they're able to kind of make decisions. They're able to do things together, and they're able to leverage the wisdom and the skills and the knowledge and the energy of all these people that are part of the family. Relationship capital. Human capital. They invest a tremendous amount in the education and development of their next generation, and the next generations of these families. There's kind of a negative perception sometimes in society that the next generations are all kind of spending money and not responsible, and yet these families built a next generation of people that were educated, that were committed, that were dedicated, that really felt a sense of obligation and connection to the family. And this was the human capital that kept creating new wealth for the family in all kinds of ways. And the fourth kind of wealth is social capital, as these families made a huge amount of money. And one of the things that all of them did is they said, we want to give back. We want to have impact in the community. We want to take care of not just our immediate family, but the family of people that are employees and the family of people that live in our community. And some of them even talked about the family of humanity and everybody in the world. And so they have a social commitment. And over the generations, this becomes louder and louder and clearer. So this is what these families are concerned about and working on to create non-financial as well as financial wealth. So, second insight, and the second thing that I learned from these families is that they talked about a culture shift from the first generation, a patriarchal family usually with one single business founder. And I'm using male terms because 97 of the 100 families were founded by a male family leader. And what they talked about is how the The patriarch, the founder, was a wonderful person who did great things. This is a person that did not come from wealth. And there's a personality profile of a wealth creator that was very, very interesting to me, that all over the world, whether I was in Asia, whether I was in South America, whether I was in the US, the personality styles of creators are people who are obsessed and live and breathe the business. They're improvisers. They're people that are secretive, and they have difficulty trusting. They trust themselves, but that's where it ends. They want to be in control. The people in the family said, well, these are wonderful people, and they can be very loving and very caring, but they're difficult to be the children of, and they're difficult to be the next generation, because the wealth creator has a certain style, and one is they've been successful, so why should they change? They see their family as children, and even when they're grown up, they tend to say, "I'm taking care of them." That's how I can show how much I care about them, by taking care of them. They're not comfortable sharing information. They're not good people at partnering with others. They don't like family conflict, and what they see as family conflict is anybody who disagrees with them. They have difficulty letting go. Since they've been successful, they're not open to new ideas. And so all of this, these wonderful factors that have to do with the style of the wealth creator, create a little bit of a challenge for the next generation that they have to overcome. And these families talk about a shift in the second or third generation from the patriarchal style of the wealth creator to a partnership style. And all of the families talked about this, how the next generation, they didn't they couldn't in the next generation find another wealth creator and make that person the successor, and that person would run the family the way the patriarch did. They had to work together. They had a different relationship with each other. They grew up together. They wanted more transparency and less secrecy. They wanted to work together. They trusted each other, so they were willing to work together. They were more professional, more organized. They were engaged together, but they wanted to work together in a way where they had clear rules and shared leadership, so that they weren't just cloning and doing what the earlier generation did. They were innovators and changers in the family culture. And to the extent that these families are successful, they become partnership and what we call stewardship cultures. Third insight that I learned from these families is that because they were both a family and a business, they needed to organize themselves in the second, third generation as both a family and a business. And they talked about two pillars, two kinds of organization. First, they needed to organize the business, and the business was often not just a single business. They had other investments, they had things, and they needed to create a good business governance to bring in professionals. By about the second or third generation, more than half the families had sold the original family business and become diversified. So they needed to create a business structure that allowed them to continue to create wealth. They created boards, they had independent directors, they had policies for family engagement. These were business issues. But then the families also created a governance process, which is ways to work together. And the qualities of the governance process began with transparency. As these families shared information about the business, they shared information. They had like a family website sometimes, and they had some clear agreements. This is how we're going to do things. Sometimes we call them family constitutions, where they're the rules and the guiding policies for the family. They had agreements, but as part of in order to make the agreements real, the family had to work together, not just in the business, but they had to organize. They had to make decisions. They had to talk about, what do we want to do with our wealth? How are we? What do we want to do together? What are our goals? What do we want to have happen? And they had to really be active in working together. They couldn't just delegate that. And in order to do that, they needed, first of all, to have clear roles and boundaries. Just because you're a family member doesn't mean that you're guaranteed employment. It doesn't mean that you can be a decision maker. You have to earn that. And so there were boundaries and roles, and people had to learn what they could and couldn't do as owners and as family members. And the family members had to be accountable to each other. They had to do what they said, and they had to come through. And if they didn't come through, they had to be held accountable. So that was governance. And these families talked about how they created not just governance about the business, but there were things that they had to do that they wanted to do together as a family. For example, they wanted to develop their non-financial capital. They wanted to do things together. They wanted to have an annual family retreat. They sometimes had family investments, like a family home, family ranch, family things, places that they went to, and someone needed to organize those things. They wanted to develop and educate and support the growth and development of the next generation. They wanted to do things together in the community, and they wanted to have clear roles and rules about how family members could be part of the business structure. So what they ended up doing is creating what a lot of them called a family council, a family group that meets alongside or separate from the business group, that builds family connection, that gets people together so that the people, wherever they live, have a time every year where they get together, where the family talks about the issues that they have. They talk about their differences when they have different values and concerns. This is where a discussion about, do we want to continue to work together as a family? What are our values? What kinds of changes do we want to see? The family has many, many things that they have to do together. And sometimes these families, by the third or fourth generation, had 100 or more members. And so they really, these families created extensive family organization as well as a business organization because of their complexity. Next insight that I got from these families is that they were not one business. By the second, third, fourth generation, they were a portfolio. Half of the families had sold their family business. The families had those that even those that had family business, a majority of them had non-family leaders. The families had real estate. They had other investments. They bought other businesses. They had an investment group. They had a family foundation. They had real estate, vacation properties, so they were diversified portfolios and very, very complex businesses. Even if they had a single large business, the profits and the money that they took out of it would lead them to invest in many different areas and do different things. So they became a portfolio of businesses rather than a single business. There are four transformations that were common in these families. And the first one I just mentioned is that what we call harvesting is, even if they had a single incredibly profitable business and reinvested a lot of their money in the business to help it grow and develop, and saying there still was some money that came out of it, and that money could be used for other kinds of investments, for lifestyle, for philanthropy. So these families had wealth that they had to make decisions about, as well as a business. This was a great surprise. All of the families, 100 families, not one of those families contained, by the fourth generation, all of the blood family members. Every single one of them had a process in a way where family members could say, we may be second cousins, we may like each other, we may like to get together for holidays, but we don't want to be business partners. So they had an exit policy, and there was a way in which each generation, some people said, we want to leave, and the core of family members didn't contain every blood member. It contained what we call those who wanted to be together, who wanted to be partners, who wanted to continue. So it was a voluntary organization and didn't necessarily include every family member. They diversified. By the third or fourth generation, even if they had a legacy business, it wasn't the original business that they had started. They had technologies that matured. They faced new economic climates. Some families were refugees and had to leave their home country and move to another place. There was all kinds of ways in which they had to reinvent themselves and diversify. And the families found that by the third or fourth generation, they had to be in multiple businesses, not just in one. And the fourth thing that these families found is they had to have some way, some core identity as a family. If they weren't a family, they were just a bunch of investors. And so what they wanted is to not just be a bunch of people that make a lot of money together, but really to be a family. And that meant they had to build their culture, their identity, and do things together. So these were characteristic of all of the families. Families talked about this as being a journey. So it wasn't like they move from one to another and they make great changes. Each family would say, well, every year something would come up. Every year we'd have a crisis. Every year we'd get together and there'd be a challenge. There were some big events. There were tragedies. There were crises. There were economic turnarounds. There was times when they had to consider selling business. They had to change their investments. So these families talked about a journey, and there was no place that they stopped and started. They were continually reinventing themselves, and therefore they had to be resilient. Let's talk about that resilience and how they created change. And they one of the great and interesting things that I learned about these families is that they had family businesses have a resource that's not available, and they have there are things about a family business that make it have capabilities that a public corporation does not. So let's look. We look at these families, and there were three very, very clearly defined groups of what we call stakeholders, constituencies in the group. The first is the elders. The older generation are the family members who have the ownership. They're the people who are the leaders. They're the people that have steered the business for a long time, and they're wise. They have the traditions. They've been hugely effective in these families. And the second group, which these elders have brought in, they've brought in trusted advisors. They have family members, non-family members that run different businesses who are highly professionals, very well paid. There are family office advisors, there are investment advisors, there are independent board members, there are trusted confidants, and they have a whole bunch of trusted advisors that are incredibly professional, add skills, very, very wise, and they help the business move, and they've helped the elders over the years. Then there's a third group, and this group is very, very central to the innovation of the family, and this is the next generation. And now let's look at the next generation. They're not owners. They may think they're going to be owners. They may expect to be owners. They expect to have a role in the business. But right now, when they're young, they're going out. They're being educated all over the world. Many of them go to different countries and different places to get education. They're often more educated than their parents, and they're also part of a new world. They understand new technology. They grow up. They learn skills in business school, in college, in professional school that their elders didn't know. That are the new things that are happening. They hear about innovations. They work in startups. They meet people from all over the world. They're an incredible force in these families. And what we find is that these new generation people are the source of innovation in these families. But it's challenging because they, for example, they see the elders and they see the trusted advisors as being, oh, they're too conservative. Oh, they're not aware of all the new technologies. They don't see the world the way we do. They're not looking ahead. They're not looking at social responsibility. They're not looking at the future of the environment. So there's a lot of new ideas. And so the families can be very contentious between the next generation that are not, since they're not owners, they don't have formal powers. They may not be the leaders of the organization, but they have energy and they have a commitment for the future and they're going to be around. So these families talk about how their governance is balanced between the elders, the advisors, and the next generation, learning to work together, learning to to kind of steer the family in different directions and deal with their differences. One of the things that we see is that I ask these families, well, where did the new ideas come from? Who thought of buying a new business? Who found the new business? Who had a new idea? Who innovated? And they talked about the major innovations in business and in what the family did came from the younger generation. And we call these people that are the innovators in the younger generation family champions. They don't have formal power. They have a new idea, and a young person in a new generation of the family has a new idea. They have to sell it to the family. They have to convince the family members to do it. They have to get support. They have to advocate for their ideas. They have to be responsible. And so these families developed a process for listening and learning about innovations and for developing the next generation. Some of these families had structures that allowed the younger generations to have influence, and two of them that we talk about. One is a junior board. They had some of these families had several boards. They had a business board, a philanthropy board, an investment board, a family council, and there were leadership positions and membership in all of these boards. And they had different kinds of ways for young people to be observers, to be learning about the board, learning about the family. And so they had what they called a junior board. And the other thing, that innovation that these families had, is a thing that a process by which family members that had a new idea could bring that idea to the family and say, we could invest in this. They could say, we should do this as a social investment. They could say, we could do this as a philanthropic investment. They could bring new ideas in, and there was a process for the family to listen and learn and consider these things. So this is how innovation happened and continual reinvention. The next thing that characterized these families is that they saw that their product and what was going to maintain them for generations ahead was the rising generation, the next their children and their grandchildren, their great grandchildren. And the idea in these families is that our business is not going to grow, and our business is not going to be vital, and it's not going to be reinvented unless we have new leadership. And you can't hire new leaders; you have to raise them. And so they invested in the next generation and encouraged them to do something in the family business, not just to go off on their own and start their own business, but to bring it back to the family, to be involved. And the next generation have concerns, and they're not sometimes feeling like, well, the business has been around for a long time. There's no place for me. I can't really have impact on it. The older generation want to do things their way. They don't want to listen, and so they have to create an open environment for the next generation to feel an incentive to be invited into the business. Not sometimes the elders are saying, "Who should we have as our successor? Who's the best person?" And they look out, and the best people in the family who are getting their education all over the world, who are incredibly talented. Best people in the family are going out on their own, and so the family has to find ways to what we call recruit the next generation and develop the next generation and get them connected to the business. And this is why we talk about the need for these families to be engaged across the generations. And the three members of the Generative Alliance, the elders, the advisors, and the next generation, have to be working together and doing things together. First thing that we see in this multi-generational engagement is the family has to get together and talk about, well, what's our wealth for? We have a lot of money. We've created great wealth. What are we going to do with it? We could divide it up and give everybody a check and say, hey, go out, do what you want. We've had a great run. Now it's your turn. We could do something together. We can invest in social ventures. We can invest in the community. We can make a difference. We can start new businesses. The question in the family is what is the purpose of the wealth? And these families have very, very difficult and impactful and deeply emotional discussions about what is our wealth for? What do we want to have happen in the future? And that's part of the development. There are four things that we heard from these families that they did to prepare the next generation. The first is they needed to have this engagement and connection across the generations so that the younger people would see that there's an opportunity in the family business, in the family enterprises, would see that there's a role, would be able to bring their ideas to the elders, and there needed to be engagement. There needed to be times and activities to get them involved. There needed to be transparency. Information needed to be shared. What is the business? What do we own? A lot of family members had no idea. What are we doing? How do we do it? So there needed to be transparency and education about the business. There needed to be mentoring and development, because these young people were not just they could go out and have their own careers and do what they wanted, but they were also stewards of incredibly complex, huge business enterprises. And because of that, because that they were going to inherit this, they needed to be aware. They needed to develop their skills and their financial skills, even if they wanted to be poets or musicians, or they still had to be aware and involved in the business and finances of the family. And finally, the family needs to have processes to recruit and to bring the young people into the business. They have to create opportunities. They have to basically sell being involved in the business and develop not just one leadership role, say you're the successor, but all of the next generation people. There are different roles that they can take and different ways that they can get involved. And with all the development and all the engagement, if there's not a genuine place for them in the business, they're going to go somewhere else. They're wealthy, they're successful, they're educated. They have a lot of choices. Why would they pick the family business? The family business has to make itself attractive so that they can continue into the next generation. And the final insight and learning that I want to talk about, I've talked about a little bit, is that there are three activities that comes up. First is philanthropy, and every family has created a foundation. They use the foundation as a way of the family members working together and doing something that's important. But they also, family members going to business school, they're working in other businesses, they're seeing the challenges in the world, and they're concerned about social responsibility, ESG. They're asking, how do we treat our employees? What are we doing to the environment? How can we do things that are helpful rather than harmful? So there's a focus and a concern about social responsibility, and the family members want to have impact, not just on in the business, but they want to have a positive impact in the world. So social investment, philanthropy, and social responsibility are all concerns of the next generation, and they're what gets people excited and motivated about being together in the next generation. So let me end here by saying, these concerns and these values create an environment where the next generations can come together, where each generation can kind of give and take and say, okay, where older generation has been here, and we've been in charge for a number of years. Now we're ready to step aside, even though we have many years of life ahead of us. The members, the advisors of the family, can step aside and move on, and new advisors could come on with looking at new realities. And the young people have a role, and this is the excitement that they have about these businesses. So what we found is that these 100-year businesses had done tremendous things as communities. They weren't just businesses; they were a community of people working together. They had a wide variety of interests. They had a wonderful legacy. They were very connected, and they spent time and energy in being connected to each other. And it took a lot of they had to do a lot of work to maintain that, and they were aware that this can't last forever. That the next generation will make their own choice. The next generation will have many more people, um, and that over time they may not stay together as a family, but the legacy and the tradition and what they had done in the generations before were truly wonderful, and really far beyond just creating a great business. So that's what I learned in the book. The book is a big fat book. It's 400 pages, and the reason it's 400 pages is that it's really full of stories. So I've gone through the principles and the learnings that we've got from these families, but really what's important is not these principles, but the stories of how these families did it. What did they do to create the next generation? How did they create innovation? How did they work together as a family? How do they overcome conflicts? How do they make decisions when people have different values? How do they keep themselves together when their family members may live in 3 or 4 different countries? So the stories in the book are not, they just give you an idea of all the different things that families can do, because they're while the principles, I could express them in a short talk like this. Really, the amount of creativity and the amount of wonderful things that these families do, it just all incredible. So
Excellent. Dennis, thank you so much. This time with you has been gold. So many notes that I've been taking and writing down, a lot of great content. I had the pleasure of hearing you give a similar presentation on this topic a few years ago at Cal State Fullerton when you came and spoke to our members there. This book, Dennis, tell us how we can get a copy of this, and also you can reach out to us at First Bank and we'll get copies for you as well. But yes, sir.
well, it's so that Borrowed from Your Grant is on Amazon, and Amazon is our marketplace. I've also, after writing that book, a lot of people ask me, well, you've been in 20 countries, you've been all over the world. There's got to be some cultural differences. And the book is about the similarities, but then I wrote with my colleague, Jim Grubman, we wrote another book called Cross Cultures. It's also on Amazon and also talks about the different cultural styles of family businesses around the world. So go on Amazon and that book and Cross Cultures and some other books I've written on family business, or you can find them
Excellent.
all.
A couple of questions that have come up in your presentation today. One is, and you touched on it a little bit, have you noticed or in your research, did you notice a correlation or talk about the correlation between cohesive families and strong businesses?
You can have a strong business without being a cohesive family, but there's two things. One is you can't maintain the unity of all the people in the business without having a strong family as well, or you're just a bunch of investors, and you begin to break down and fragment over investment issues and diversity. So one thing is that you need to have a strong family in order to run the business. But the other thing, and this is in a way more important, is that because these people have the legacy of the business, and because they like each other and they have a shared history, and they've grown up together, and the people look up to them and see them as a family. They want to do things together, and they want to step from running a great business to moving off and doing great things as a family. So it isn't that they stay together as a family so they can run their business. That's true, but they're staying together as a family and doing all the work to be connected, to get together, to learn from each other, to share, to deal with differences. They do all this work because they want to have a wider impact beyond just we ran this business and we made a lot of money and it was really great. That works for a while, but the next generation says, well, it's got to be more than that, or it just doesn't interest me.
Were there any big surprises that came up during the process of your research or interviews? I know you probably went in asking a question, sort of expecting an answer to go ... and it didn't. Any massive surprises that really jumped out at you during your research?
Well, I'm the kind of researcher that approaches research with
Awesome.
wonder.
No
So
expectations.
I came out and wanted to know. I was going all over the world. I didn't know what I would find, and actually, I expected to find a lot of cultural differences, and I was expecting to write on all the different styles around the world. And the biggest surprise I had was that the common principles that I came up with existed at all. I didn't expect that, and I think the emphasis over the generations on the family and working together rather than just how can we make more money from the business. I think those were two um, wonderful surprises that I got as I did
Excellent.
the
Well, thank you so
research.
much, Dennis. As I mentioned, this time has been so valuable for me personally. I know for our audience as well. If you want to learn more about Dennis, obviously, as I mentioned at the beginning of the show today, Dennis and others will be presenting at our symposium in Santa Barbara later this year. You can find more information about that
Yep.
on our website at first.bank/family business. You can reach out to me directly at ed.hart@fbol.com, and we'll get all that information to you as well. How do people find you, Dennis, if they want to follow you on social media or they want to reach out and talk about it?
I'm not on social media. I'm on LinkedIn, I guess, but my website is dennisjaffe.com, and I use that as the library. I put all my papers and articles and webinars and podcasts on it, and you can download them all. I'm an open source kind of person. I really want to share this with people, so all the stuff on my website you can download and access, and it's all
Excellent.
there.
Well, it was great getting time with you at dinner in San Francisco recently. It's great having time with you again today. Thank you so much for your time. For all of you who joined us today, we hope you enjoyed our webinar and our time with Dennis, and that the information that he shared with us today is tremendously valuable and makes a positive difference for you, your family, business, and those around you. Again, we invite you to visit www.first.bank family business to stay up to date on all of our upcoming events. We're doing a family business philanthropy event here in Orange County in August. We have our symposium, as I alluded to before, in October, and monthly webinars, podcasts, research, and so forth. So you can find all of that on our website. And again, thank you so much for joining us today, and we hope you have a wonderful week.